Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. Wendy, let me ask you something. What would you do if tomorrow morning you found that all the power in Virginia Beach was gone, there was no more electricity?
What would I do? I would probably go outside to dry my hair. It's been very hot here. You know, that happened the other day. My breaker went off, and you know how sometimes in your house you'll flip a switch, and the two rooms I need the most, you know, my bathroom and my bedroom light, no lights. And it was, you know, it was very an uncomfortable feeling, like, what am I going to do now?
But
you know?
No power whatsoever. That's the situation we're looking at. If there's an EMP blast, ladies and gentlemen, it is one of the most crucial things you can imagine. A congressional report has said that in the event that the power grid in America is disabled for a year, 90% of the American people would die. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about drying our hair. We're talking about not having any food, not having any access to money. It'll be a crisis. Well, strong foreign cyber hackers are plotting to take over our power grids and other vital industrial networks. A successful attack would cause such chaos and destruction that, as I said, one report indicates it could lead to the death of 90% of all the people in the United States of America.
And these attacks could come from an enemy who may never step on U.S. soil. CBN national security correspondent Eric Rosales investigates these attempts to cripple America and what's being done to prevent them.
In just the past 8 months, federal authorities have issued several public warnings about foreign hackers penetrating the United States power grid and other critical infrastructure. Cybersecurity experts say the intent is to plant digital grenades in these systems until they decide to pull the pin.
Right now, we're tracking around 8 different teams that specifically target industrial networks.
Robert Lee spent 5 years working at the National Security Agency and Pentagon Cyber Command before forming his own company called Dragos. Lee and his crew protect industrial control systems by acting like detectives investigating a crime scene.
They're leaving breadcrumbs the entire way through, so they're giving us pieces to go and find those behaviors until they get to that impact.
Working from a warehouse in Hanover, Maryland, Dragos track foreign hacking groups in real time, then hunt them down to prevent damage to facilities that produce oil, gas, and other energy.
We've seen that these are not theoretical attacks. And my team was actually involved in the 2 different Ukraine attacks that happened. So the Ukraine 2015 and the Ukraine 2016, a national level adversary compromised portions of their power grid and did exactly that. We're able to turn off the lights in those regions.
Now Lee says these cyber enemies are going way beyond controlling just light switches.
But now we're starting to see really aggressive behavior on, well, I'm going to design a capability to kill people outside of conflict, outside of war, to target civilian life.
And an attack on the United States would create casualties on a massive scale. Research shows a cyber attack on the power grid killing electricity would potentially leave millions of Americans without food, clean water, access to money, health care, and more.
Frankly, the United States is under attack by entities that are using cyber to penetrate virtually every major action that takes place in the United States.
The Director of National Intelligence recently told Congress that cyber weapons exist in the hands of not only countries, but also terrorists and other activists.
While Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea pose the greatest cyber threats, other nation states, terrorist organizations, transnational criminal organizations, and ever more technically capable groups and individuals use cyber operations to achieve strategic and malign objectives.
This isn't a sideshow. You know, this is the way, the primary way our enemies would come after us in a future war. Cyber, physical sabotage, and nuclear EMP attack.
Dr. Peter Pry worked on the U.S. Commission assessing the threat of an electromagnetic EMP attack, which would wipe out electrical systems. As an example, he says a country like North Korea could target the United States by transporting a nuclear weapon over the South Polar region, then detonating it to create a high-altitude EMP. A congressional report shows such an attack could wipe out the power grid indefinitely. That could lead to the deaths of up to 90% of all Americans within a year. So how much would it cost to secure our power grid? In 2008, an EMP commission estimated it would cost around $2 billion. But former CIA Director James Woolsey says today's amount to strengthen the grid would likely be in the tens of billions. But Dr. Price says the D.C. bureaucracy and political influence prevent that from happening.
The electric power industry doesn't want to do it. They have vast lobbying resources on K Street. They own basically the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which recently defied Secretary of Energy Perry in his effort to come up with a more secure grid. They actually defied the Secretary of Energy.
Another major issue, while larger utilities have beefed up cyber defense, smaller regional companies often overlook the need for such security.
Anywhere between 80 and 90% of the critical infrastructure in this country is held in private hands. And so, other than the regulators, there's no real control over doing the things that you need to do, the basic blocking and tackling of cyber hygiene and so forth.
Since our critical infrastructures depend on each other, Homeland Security holds exercises like Cyberstorm 6. It simulates various cyber attacks simultaneously on a variety of facilities, forcing federal, state, and local agencies to work with private companies to quickly find solutions.
The ability to exercise how we coordinate, how we collaborate, how we share information, because that is just as important, as we've seen in every real-life incident, as the actual technical means of identifying who's doing it and getting them off the computers.
Bottom line, enemies big and small want to plant cyber sleeper weapons within our infrastructure so they can eventually use them to destroy our way of life. The challenge will be ensuring a full team effort between both the U.S. government and private enterprise to fully protect us. Eric Rosales, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Eric. And what I also want to point out, ladies and gentlemen, is we mentioned this idea of an EMP blast. A low-level nuclear explosion over Chicago, say at 1,200 feet or 1,500 feet or 5,000 feet, sometime like that. So you launch a missile and have it explode. One nuclear weapon over Chicago would shut down the grid for the entire nation, just one of them. And if there's a solar flare that comes at us and there's a surge from the sun, it would just take one of those surges to knock out our grid. Now, we're talking about the death of 90% of the Americans. And so it cost 10 million, a billion, or it cost 20 billion, it cost 100 billion. It wouldn't matter. When we're looking at a $10, $20 trillion economy, this is nothing. And it's something that Congress should get on right away. I mean, it is a crisis. And it means that the grid needs to get hardened. And we've got to make sure that the nodes that connect the various electrical plants are connected and hardened so that they can resist cyber attack. That's one thing. That's just man-made along the way, but they can address the EMP blast that could come at us from a number of sources. But it's got to be done, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about crucial. And so absolutely, we've got to do it. And but you just think of that. You have no power. Your refrigerator doesn't work, so you don't have any frozen food after a very short length of time. The grocery stores don't function because all of their frozen stuff is no longer functional. The trucks don't work. The lights don't work. Well, your 911 calls don't work. Your police can't function. I mean, we're talking about chaos in our society. The whole society could break down if we don't have electricity. We're so dependent. There was a time we didn't need electricity. People on farms had their own way of living. And I remember years ago on a farm where we had a great big barrel that was like a storage battery, and that was the way they could get a little primitive electricity. But we're talking about serious matter. You can't get your money. You can't have credit. The stock market freezes all the way across the nation. It's just chaos.
So stock up on kerosene.
Well, it's more than that, dear.
I know.
Up in my mountain, I've got a place in the hills. I've got a 100-kilowatt generator. We here at CBN have several generators, big generators that keep things going. So if we lose power off the grid, we can go to our own generators.
Is this something average Americans really need to prepare for? Do we need to have supplies?
Well, supplies, you can't. How can you supply for a year? I mean, how can anybody do that? We're so dependent on a situation. I mean, the grocery stores have got about 2 or 3 days worth of supplies, so they're figuring on these big trucks coming in day after day after day. But I guess one way, if people have their own generators, it's a good move. But my goodness, we're talking about crisis that could come about. And I don't want to be an alarmist, but if the government would just say, look, we've got to fix this, and it's going to take political will, but we need to do it. I mean, this is a $10–20 trillion economy. We're talking about a few $1 billion, $10 billion or $20 billion or whatever, which is nickels and dimes compared to the damage of what this thing could do. And so we need to give money to the private sector, subsidize, if we have to, the electric utilities to make sure that all those nodes are secure against cyber and against EMP blasts. Ladies and gentlemen, it's got to be done.